How you doing? It's John here. I'm with Old Time Tales, and we got part 5, the final part of um, The Devil and Daniel Webster by Mr. Stephen Benét. The fire began to die on the hearth, and the wind before morning to blow. The light was getting gray in the room when Daniel Webster finished, and his words came back at the end of a New Hampshire ground and the one spot of land that each man loves and clings to. He painted a picture of that, and to each one of that jury he spoke of things long forgotten, for his voice could search the heart, and that was his gift and his strength. And to one his voice is like the forest and its secrecy, and to another like the sea and the storms of the sea. And when one heard the cry of his lost nation in it, and another saw the little harmless scene he had remembered for years, but each saw something. And when Daniel Webster finished, he didn't know whether or not he'd saved Jabez Stone, but he knew he'd done a miracle, for the glitter was gone from the eyes of the judge and the jury, and for the moment they were men again, and knew they were men. "The defense rests," said Daniel Webster, and stood there like a mountain. His eyes were still ringing with his speech, and he didn't hear anything till he heard Judge Hawthorne say, "The jury will retire to consider the verdict." Walter Butler rose in his place, and his face had a dark, gay pride in it. "The jury has considered its verdict," he said, and looked at the stranger full in the eye. "We find for the defendant, Jabez Stone." With that, the smile left the stranger's face, but Walter Butler did not flinch. "'Tis not perhaps strictly in accordance with the evidence," he said, "but even the damned may salute the eloquence of Mr. Webster." With that, the long crow of a rooster split the gray morning sky, and judge and jury were gone from the room like a puff of smoke, as if they'd never been there. The stranger turned to Daniel Webster, smiling wryly. "Major Butler always was a bold man," he said. "I'd not thought him quite so bold. Nevertheless, my congratulations, as between two gentlemen." "I'll have that paper first, if you please," said Daniel Webster, and he took it and tore it into 4 pieces. It was queerly warm to the touch. "And now," he said, "I'll have you." And his hand came down like a bear trap on the stranger's arm, for he knew that once you bested anybody like Mr. Scratch in a fair fight, his power on you was gone, and he could see that Mr. Scratch knew it too. The stranger twisted and wiggled, but he couldn't get out of that grip. Come, Mr. Webster," he said, smiling palely. "This sort of thing is ridiculous. If you're worried about the cost of the case, naturally I'd be glad to pay." "And so you shall," said Daniel Webster, shaking him till his teeth rattled, "for you'll sit right down at that table and draw up a document promising never to bother Jabez Stone, nor his heirs, or assigns, or any other New Hampshire man till doomsday. For any Hades we want to raise in the state, we can raise ourselves, without assistance from strangers." "Out," said the stranger. "Out. Well, they never did run very big to the barrel, but I agree." So he sat down and drew up the document. But Daniel Webster kept his hand on the coat collar the whole time. "And now may I go?" said the stranger, quite humble, when Daniel, seeing the document was in proper and legal form. "Go," said Daniel, giving him another shake. "I'm still trying to figure out what I'll do with you, for you've settled the cost of the case, but you haven't settled with me. I think I'll take you back to Marshfield," he said, kind of reflective. "I've got a ram there named Goliath that can butt through an iron door. I'd like to turn you loose in the field and see what he'd do." Well, with that, the stranger began to beg and to plead, and he begged and he pled so humble that finally Daniel, who was naturally kind-hearted, agreed to let him go. The stranger seemed terrible grateful for that, and said, just to show they were friends, he'd tell Daniel's fortune before leaving. So Daniel agreed to that, though he didn't take much stock in fortune tellers ordinarily. But naturally, the stranger was a little different. Well, he pried and he peered at the line of Daniel's hand. He told him one thing and another was quite remarkable, but they were all in the past. Yes, that's all true, and it happened," said Daniel Webster. "But what's to come in the future?" The stranger grinned kind of happily and shook his head. "The future's not as you think it," he said. "It's dark. You have great ambition, Mr. Webster." I have, said Daniel firmly, for everybody knew he wanted to be president. Seems almost within your grasp, said the stranger, but you will not attain it. Lesser men will be made president, and you will be passed over. And if I am, I'll still be Daniel Webster, said Daniel. Say on. You have 2 strong sons, said the stranger, shaking his head. You look to found a line, but each will die in war, and neither reach greatness. Never die, they are still my sons, said Daniel. Say on. You have made great speeches, said the stranger. You will make more. Ah, said Daniel Webster, but the last great speech you make will turn many of your own against you. They will call you Ichabod. They will call you other names. Even in New England, some will say you turned your coat and sold your country, and their voices will be loud against you till you die. So, it is an honest speech. It does not matter what men said. Then Daniel Webster looked at the stranger, and their glances locked. One question, he said. I have fought for the Union all my life. Will I see that fight won against those who would tear it apart? Not while you live, said the stranger grimly, but it will be won. And after you are dead, there are thousands who will fight for your cause because of the words that you spoke. Why then, you long-barreled, slab-sided, lantern-jawed, fortune-telling note-shaver, said Daniel Webster with a great roar of laughter, be off with you to your own place before I put my mark on you, for by the 13 original colonies, I'd go to the pit itself to save the Union. And with that, he drew back his foot for a kick that would have stunned a horse. It was only the tip of his shoe that caught the stranger, but he went flying out the door with his collective box under his arm. And now, said Daniel Webster, seeing Jabez Stone beginning to rouse from his swoon, let's see what's left in the jug, for it's dry work talking all night. I hope there's pie for breakfast, neighbor Stone. But they say that whenever the devil comes near Marshfield, even now, he gives it a wide berth. And he hasn't been seen in the state of New Hampshire from that day to this. I'm not talking about Massachusetts or Vermont. And that's the end of The Devil and Daniel Webster. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. If you like it, go ahead and click the bell, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff they tell us to do. This is John from Old Time Tales, thanking you again for listening to our story.